I'm Abby Kinney, and you are listening to Upzoned. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Upzoned, a show where we take a big story from the news each week that touches the Strong Towns conversation, and we upzone it. We talk about it in depth. I'm Abby Kinney. I'm a planner in Kansas City, and today I'm joined by Chuck Marone, founder of Strong Towns. Hello, Chuck. Welcome back.
Hey, Abby. So nice to chat with you. It's getting to be winter here, so we're waiting breathlessly for snow at any moment to arrive.
Really? Yeah, I see your
Yeah,
pretend fire behind you. So I'm glad that you are getting into the
pretend
winter
fire.
spirit. Is that a real fire?
It is not a real fire, but it does have real heat that comes out of it. So
Okay,
there
fair,
is heat
fair.
that is actually generated, which is necessary right now.
Yeah,
So
well,
yeah.
I don't envy you. Today's kind of our first cold day. It was actually 80 degrees here yesterday, and now it's 40, which is kind of a bummer. But I guess it is November, so it is to be expected.
All right. We're rocking the 20s, so it'll be yeah. I'm gonna go home after we're done, and I'm gonna have a fire. Is actually what I'm gonna do.
That sounds
It's gonna be
lovely.
epic.
Yeah, that does sound epic. Okay.
It is lovely.
Well, enjoy that. I'm glad we got our news hour out of the way so that we can jump into our story today.
This is Midwest talk
I
with Chuck and Abby.
Yeah. Yeah, really.
Sorry,
Yes, this is just our Midwest small talk.
the Midwest
Yeah,
moment.
totally.
Hmm.
So the article that we are covering today was published in Vice News by Aaron Gordon. It's entitled "Here's How the U.S. Can Stop Wasting Billions of Dollars on Each Transit Project." So the article basically outlines the conclusions of a report published by an NYU research group led by Alon Levy. And the research spans some 15 years and demonstrates the extent to which transit projects in the US are inflated compared to other countries around the world and what we can do about it. So one example that they use is that the cost of constructing a subway in New York is double what it costs in Tokyo around the same time and about 10 times what it costs in Paris. So that's a lot. And according to the author, the research found New York to be really the most expensive place to build transit on the planet, in the world. And the lack of efficiency basically means we get less transit for more money and we have a lot of public sector debt. So why is this the case? Levy presents several reasons that combined may get to what the problem is in the United States. We've got kind of a list that's presented in this article that is, really boils down to inflated costs of hiring employees. So that being contractors, the bidding process, hiring consultants rather than having some level of in-house expertise to do basic design work, the I guess haphazard coordination of utility companies and other things that are within the public right of way that cost a lot of money to figure out during these design processes. Also, the issue of over designing projects and particularly transit stations, they said, are driving up the cost of these transit centers. And then the last two things being that, really local politicians drive up the cost of projects through micromanagement or slowing down the planning processes. And this one I thought was interesting, and it's that politicians and largely our society views infrastructure projects as job programs. And so we hire more workers than needed. So that's really, I guess, the crux of this problem. And it's not necessarily something that can be fixed in one fell swoop or by doing one little thing. Essentially, the article says that we need to actually care about this issue in order to fix it. Chuck, I think from your perspective, I'm interested in kind of how you've looked at this issue of transit projects in particular. I know that, we talk about the infrastructure cult or are, the infrastructure industrial complex and how these things are really meant to drive up costs. And do you see transit as being kind of an integral part of that, or at least kind of within that overall infrastructure cult?
No, I mean, here's I think the important thing. I don't think transit is uniquely bad in this regard, right? I think America is uniquely bad in this regard. So, the I feel like the important takeaway here is that you actually have people who genuinely care about transit and care about transit more than the other. And I'm gonna use a word that might offend some people, but the other petty things that we get bogged down in American politics. We're going to blame unions for the cost being high. We're going to blame incompetent politicians for the cost being high. We're going to blame greedy corporations and consultants for the cost being high. Everybody kind of involved in the political zeitgeist has their own kind of vector of evil that they can point to as the cause of this. And what you have here in this report is you have people genuinely stepping back saying, we really care about transit. We want transit to actually work. Why does it cost so much more here than in other places? This doesn't make sense. And what they've come up with is a really comprehensive list of all the major contributing factors for what this is. Here's the thing. I think we could focus on transit, and this article does focus on transit. But this is what's going on with roadways. This is what's going on with sewer and water systems. This is what's going on with every public sector infrastructure investment we're
Yeah, and
making.
I think that was kind of
And
what I was trying to ask. I mean, when I was reading this article, I haven't worked on transit projects specifically, but I'm working on a streetscape project right now, and a lot of the things that drive up the costs are very similar. I mean, it's not. I don't think that this list is exclusive to transit. I think it's like this kind of industrial complex we have with public projects generally.
and let's say let me put some nuance on this idea of industrial complex, because when you say that, I know what you mean, but I think that there are people who say that and like they hear conspiracy theory to drive up costs and not. Here's what that term means to me. It means a system that is focused on one thing and doesn't really care at all about another thing.
Hmm.
And the one thing we're focused on in the case of infrastructure is spending money. We are really, really focused on doing more projects, doing more stuff. And we don't really care at all. And people are going to, but we don't really care about the cost. It's really a very low priority for us, how much things cost. And so what happens is that over time, over decades, over generations of having this different focus or this different obsession, we have created and evolved systems that tend to really focus on how do we deliver big projects? How do we do big things? As opposed to how do we do things cost effectively? How do we do things that financially make some sense? Abby, I have seen this over and over and over again. I mean, this is the essence of why we have strong towns as a movement, as an organization. For years, I worked on projects that financially were insane, and they were obviously insane. But nobody working on the project within the system with me had as their priority making sure that these made any financial sense. The priority of everybody was getting the next project, getting the next thing done, getting the next contract, getting more asphalt on the ground, building more concrete, doing more stuff. And when that is your focus, you tend to over time pay lip service to whether something financially makes any sense or not. And it starts to just not make any sense. And no one can really point to exactly why, but it doesn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, and that's why I say that it's definitely not exclusive to transit projects. I think when there's an ability to inflate costs, there's not really an incentive to try to keep costs down or try to stay true to whatever the bid was. The article talked a lot about kind of how the bidding process works, which I thought was kind of interesting. I don't know that I fully understand how other countries do it, but they did use an example from Italy where the itemized costs for materials and labor are basically publicized and required. And so, if you're doing a construction project, the public sector there's kind of a flipped incentive instead of contractors really setting those prices and then driving the prices up after the bid has been selected. It's set at the beginning and it's very detailed and itemized, which I thought is kind of interesting. And I think what this boils down to is, incentives. Where are the incentives coming from? Is there an incentive for these agencies to try to drive down costs, to have stronger leadership, to not have corruption? I think in the case of New York, that's probably a big issue within these large public agencies where there's not really a strong assurance of accountability. And the article even says, I don't know if you can bleep this out, but essentially leadership needs to give a shit. I mean, that's really what they say. And so
It's exactly
yeah, and so
right.
it's like when the incentives are not aligned to make that happen, I mean, it's really a big structural problem. And I think that when I say industrial complex, that's really what I mean. It's an industry, and it has all of these really deep rooted incentives that are driving different things to happen. And I think when you have these complexes, it can be very challenging to actually undo these knots that they're mentioning. They have this list of problems, and many of them are kind of interconnected and related to one another and can be very challenging to fix. And politicians, leadership, there's a question of if they have a real incentive to address these sorts of issues.
I used to have in the early days of Strong Towns when I was going around doing this presentation that we called the curbside chat. I would give this to groups of 2 and 3 and 5, and like wherever some people would get together and let me talk, I would go and share this stuff. And I had this one line that I would use, and it was something along the lines of, we look at um, waste and fraud in this country, and we think that it is the welfare family who's got the big screen TV. Like, oh, look at them on the dole, and if we could just tighten that up and what have you. And the reality is like almost every single family in this country has this massive amount of asphalt, concrete, pipe in front of their house that they make no use of, that they make just like squandered in massive ways, that we're completely blind to. We're not sensitive to it at all. And once you recognize it, once you visualize it, once you see it what it is, um, you realize just how prolifically wasteful we are as a country. I, I, I know there's this rural urban divide. I live in a small town. I'm sensitive to a lot of the complaints that rural America and small town America has, that urban America is blind to. Um, but one thing that small town America just does not grasp is how ridiculous our infrastructure is. You can go to any country in the world and go to their rural areas, and you're going to have small, tiny backwoods roads winding through the countryside where two people can't drive at speed, going in different directions without slowing down. You're going to have dirt paths here and there. You're going to have rural, right? You can go out to the middle of North Dakota where there's nothing out there, and you're going to have wide, mostly paved roads that people can drive 70 miles an hour on that carry, 150 cars a day. It is insane what we build. And the reality is nowhere in our system are we sensitive to that insanity. And because we're not sensitive to it, it shows up in this multiple X factors of what everybody else pays for stuff. And Yes, we can point at unions. Yes, we can point at politicians. Yes, we can point at consultants. Yes, we can point at greedy, contractors. Okay, we can point at all that. But the reality is our system is set up to solve one problem. And that problem is, how does America stay out of the Great Depression? We got out of the Great Depression with World War II. Great. World War II ends. We bring home all these people. We shut down all these businesses, industries of war. How do we stay out of depression? Well, the way we do it is we turn our cities into machines of growth. We build homes, we build roads and streets and pipes, we build commercial buildings, we just build, 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 build. And it kept us out of depression. It gave us, for a brief time, a middle class. It created a certain level, a base level of prosperity. But over time, the way it has manifested is that we just waste insane amounts of money. And by money, I mean resources, capacity that we have as Americans that could be spent in other ways. We waste insane amounts of it trying to, in a sense, keep us out of the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And the ironic thing is that I think it is going to drive us into the next Great Depression. Will be a result of this lack of productivity. And then we will look at, articles like this and we'll say, yeah, these are the things we need to fix. And we'll fix them. But not till it's like horribly painful and we've wasted lots and lots and lots of our capacity.
Well, and to your point about, going to rural areas and just seeing ridiculous levels of infrastructure, to the point that it's completely unproductive, and just the unproductive way in which we spend money generally. To me, it kind of aligns with what we were talking about last week, and that is kind of this sense of expectations, right? We are a sophisticated society. We don't live on dirt roads in any context. We need to have, the best infrastructure that, we can get money for. And, there is a sense of people feeling that this is normal because this is the way it's been for a long time, right? I mean, this is how we've been spending money for a long time. And not only does it touch highways, bridges, roads, all kinds of public works projects, but also touching transit. So I think it should be no surprise that this would impact transit projects as well, just because transit is not as emphasized as other types of public works projects. I think the benefit of an article like this is to show potentially, if we could bring the cost of transit projects down because they're inflated. I think that shows you the value of transit um, more than we're really recognizing it today.
Mhm. Yeah, no. And I think, that to me, the bridge here that we should be building intellectually is that these are people who care about transit, who are doing this study and putting things together. A lot of times when you talk about this stuff, and I'm old enough now to remember when there were politicians who actually cared about budgets,
Mm-hmm.
cared about things like deficits, cared about debt, and not in some superficial way, but actually like really felt like that was an important thing we needed to do for the long-term health of our
Well, they
country.
say those,
Um,
like the article says, politicians will say that they want efficient and effective government.
right.
But, is that really a priority? I don't know.
No, no, it's not. Um, I brought up an article here that we ran this week about the Missouri Department of Transportation. I don't know if you saw that or not,
Mm-mm.
but MoDOT put out a tweet about it's the 50th year anniversary of the loop in
Yeah,
downtown.
I did see that tweet.
How like cringy. Anyway, I brought out this old quote because a few years ago, Missouri went through this referendum on whether we were going to raise taxes and to fund transportation. And you had one of your top transportation officials, and I'll read the quote. He said, quote, "It's MoDOT's job to figure out what transportation needs are and how much they cost. It's up to the legislature and the people to figure out how to pay for it." And, you know, that mindset perfectly encapsulates the kind of intellectually lazy, just fat and happy society that we have evolved into. And I say fat and happy not as a way to, because we're not fat and happy. Like it's not working. There's a lot of deep tension throughout all of society. But what you have here is you have systems and their institutions. I mean, this is part of our, we're having this struggle with institutions in this country. Like, are they good? Are they bad? Do they need to be reformed? What you, you see an institution like MoDOT and really like every state DOT that has no sense of fiscal constraint. There's never a point in the process where you would say, um, we have to make a decision based on fiscal constraints. You say, here's how much it costs. And if you want it, pay for it. And if you don't want it, it will just fall apart. And that's not actually like a real decision.
Yeah.
That is putting, that is, you know, having it be a decision on whether we want to spend money or not. Not here's the money we have. What's the optimum system we create? You you don't evolve that in a, the only way you evolve that is in a system of plenty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we had at the end of World War II. We had a system of plenty where we just gave DOTs tons of money. We just gave transit agencies tons of money. We just gave infrastructure, housing, we just gave all these things tons of money. And all those feedback loops that make it actually work, no one cared about because we weren't trying to solve that problem. The problem we have to solve today is not just how do we build things that make financial sense, but how do we make actually like productive use of this stuff we've built? And our system is just, it is tone deaf to that entire conversation. It's not even something we bother to ask or ponder or struggle with. And because that, we have transit that costs 10 times what it costs in, you know, not 10 times what it costs in, other 10 times what it costs in other places that we would look at and say, wow, this is a very socialist, top down, union heavy, bloated bureaucracy delivering this thing at, 1/10 the cost of what we are. What are we doing? Like, what are we doing?
Well,
That just makes no
yeah,
sense.
exactly. And I think, the article touches on how other countries really, price these things and structure projects and attributes that to the reason that that public transit projects are a lot cheaper in other places. And it sounds like really, I don't think I fully understand the examples and how these projects are being structured, but it sounds like what they're doing is essentially flipping the incentives and up front trying to get people to compete for lower prices rather than inflate prices upwards. And uh, I kind of want to pose to you, I mean, you've thought about this a lot. How do you see ways we can create different kinds of feedback loops and drive prices down for these large infrastructure projects?
I think it starts with the project selection process, right? And it actually starts even, I think, further than that, which is saying what are our constraints. When you work in a world where money is not a constraint that you care about, your cost will go crazy.
Yeah.
And if you just took the idea of the Department of Transportation in every state and said, instead of you coming up with a list of projects you want to do and then giving us a cost, why don't you come up with, here's the amount of money you have, what's the maximum that what's the best transportation system you can provide with this much money? And just that exercise of like starting with a different constraint changes the way you think about everything throughout the
Mm-hmm.
system, right? um, I've often said that DOTs should publish basically a list of here's how many highway miles we have, and here's the annualized cost of sustaining them. It, it's not a hard number to come up with, right? I mean, we can take these costs that recur at regular intervals. We know what they are. We know the cost of asphalt and bituminous pavement. We know the cost of concrete. We can project out in reasonable sense. We know that it's going to last 20 to 25 years. We can We can look at our inventory today and say, here is our costs, and here is what this would be in an annualized sense. So here's what our budget needs to be just to maintain what we
Yeah.
have. If we did that, we would find is that we have about 25% of what we need to maintain the stuff we've already
Yeah.
built. And so at that point, to me, what are we even, we're asking questions that have ridiculous answers. And they have ridiculous answers not because we can't figure it out, but because we don't care to ask the question,
Yeah.
right? The end of this article had this quote that I think is great. And it says this, crucially, this report we're discussing, the central finding speaks to the issues not just with transit in the US, but with all kinds of institutions. We need better political and institutional leadership, which actually cares about costs, about treating this metastasizing cancer on American society that is hobbling our ability to build anything
Yeah.
decent.
I caught that
That
quote
is
too.
what tells.
Yeah.
I'm like, people are like, Chuck, why are you against? I just wrote this thing about this street project in Salem, Oregon, and the pushback that I've gotten from people is, Chuck, why are you against bike lanes? Why are you against people being able to get to the VA? And I'm like, look, I'm not against bike lanes. I'm not against people being able to get to the VA. Like, I get why that's necessary. But you're telling me that a $30 million project that has an infinite payback window, like literally the payback window is infinity, it never, ever pays for itself, is somehow making you better off because it has bike lanes and it's next to the VA. Doesn't make any sense to me. We have to be able to solve those problems within these constraints. And I think I've used this quote on this show before, but it goes back to the British physicist Ernest Rutherford, who said in World War II, and I'm sorry, he was with a bunch of men. He said, "Gentlemen, we've run out of money. It's time to start thinking." And there's
Yeah.
something like fiscal Republican in that people recoil against, right? Like, oh, just starve the beast. There's nothing about me or strong towns or this report that is starve the beast and that will fix the problem, right?
Yeah.
You starve the government and it actually just screws up. We need a different set of priorities, a different set of starting points, a different set of objectives when we set out to do things. And we need better political leadership, which actually cares about costs. We do not have that today anywhere in government,
But
even in the most Tea Party fiscal hawk. We have nothing like that.
Chuck, how can we expect politicians to lead a cause and caring about fiscal sustainability? I mean, it seems like that needs to be something that people care about, and then politicians will respond. I mean, or politicians need to find a way to make people care about it. I mean, I feel like politicians a lot of the times just kind of, I, I don't want to say that they don't have their own perspective and their own things that they stand for, but if their constituency doesn't care about a particular issue, like, I don't know, being responsible with money, if that's not like a big issue for people, it may not be something that they focus on. And I feel like that's part of the problem.
Abby, I have been at small township meetings where everybody on the town board is like, I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a budget hawk, I'm for keeping taxes low, I'm for responsible government. That is the whole reason that I'm here. This is what I'm all about. And I will walk them through what they're while they are planning to take on issue bonds, so borrow money to maintain roads. And I walk them through and show them the very simple math, basic math, that demonstrates that all they are doing is borrowing from future generations to live a happier life, a better lifestyle today of wider roads and what have you, and that eventually they're going to run out of money completely and all this stuff is going to fall apart. And they will look at it. And I even had one say, this is damning. It's irrefutable. I get what you're saying, but this is what the people want. And I'm here to vote for what the people
Yeah. So shred it, get rid of it. Yeah.
well, so we're going to borrow the money
Yeah.
and go, I
Like
have
that's a
come to
problem.
recognize.
That's a real problem. If broader
It's a big
society doesn't
problem.
care about inflated costs and spending too much money, uh, it how can we expect the politicians to be principled about that? I mean, truly.
But I think there's two intersecting problems here, Abby. I feel like one of them is the bread and circuses problem, right? Like this crap is our bread and circuses of our time. Rome could never get rid of bread and circuses, or they needed bread and circuses because that like was like a distraction from everything else. I think that the other problem that you have is that our top down political factions today benefit deeply from one part of this narrative, right? Um, Unions are driving up costs. Bureaucrats are driving up costs. Incompetent government is driving up costs. That is all true, right?
Yeah.
And this report kind of demonstrates that that's all true. Well, that fits really well with one political perspective. There's another political perspective that says, corporations are greedy. Their consultants are taking advantage of the system. No one is really responsive to the needs. Like all of those things are also true. And that fits a narrative over here. We're having this conversation about inflation today. And what is inflation? Well, it's greedy corporations making more profit off of you. The, these are political narratives that, in a sense, top down benefit the players in the system, even though they are incomplete at best. This is the whole project of Strong
Yeah.
Towns, is to try to help people recognize that we need to care about this and we need to care about it from the bottom up. And the reality is from the bottom up, we actually can care about this. We can actually do something about this
Yeah.
very problem. And the warning that's always sitting back there is we ignore this at our own peril. I mean, ultimately, I realize, there's this kind of mindset in this country today that, well, if inflation's a construct, we'll just print the money. Deficits aren't really
Nothing's
real. None of this
real.
fiscal stuff
Yeah.
matters. We owe the money to ourselves. So, like, what does it matter? Uh, you know, it, all of these things are attempts to like explain away why constraints don't
Yeah.
matter. And I always get back to the idea that, okay, fine, but all of this stuff that you say are artificial constraints that don't matter are representations of people's labor, people's time, people's energy. They're representations of actual raw materials that we have to utilize to do these things. And those things are all finite, not infinite.
Hmm.
And when you waste those and squander those, you are wasting and squandering not only our present, but our
Yeah.
future. And that is the urgency to get this right. That I do think can, if it moves from the bottom up, can actually affect as the top starts to crumble, which is what we see. I mean, through a Strong Downs lens, I see the top down stuff breaking down in a huge way and not
Yeah.
working. We can either have, our politicians exploit that and turn us against each other, or we can work from the bottom up to fix it and demand that these systems be reformed. And I feel like those are the answers in front of
Yeah.
us.
Well, and we've definitely learned to live in a society where largely we do not accept constraints. And I want to say that's like a boomer mindset, but I feel like it's also it's like a peak millennial mindset, and it makes you wonder: are we going to have like more of a
Chuck, are you against
like a
bike lanes?
generational shift? Yeah, it's like we really don't like constraint, and unless we're forced to
I
deal
mean,
with
how can you?
constraint, I feel like it's one of those things where we're going to have to hit some point of tension before people really care about it. Um, People who are
How
not
can you
within
look
this
at a?
strong towns conversation.
Yes, I agree. How can you look at a project in Salem, Oregon, if you're a resident of Salem, where the tax revenue you will get in the most optimistic scenario is 250,000 a year, and the debt on the bond on your share of the project, now the federal government's paying half, you're paying, the debt on your share is 600,000 a year. So you're bringing in 250,000, just the interest on the debt, just the interest, not principal, not paying down the debt, not future maintenance costs, is 600,000. So you never ever ever break even
Yeah,
on this
you're just
project.
upside
How
down.
can you how can you look at that math and your response is, well, why are you against bike
Yeah.
lanes? I'm like, you I'll say this in like you stupid fool. Like, why are you so insensitive to the fact that this doesn't work at
Yeah.
all? And the reality is, we just don't care. Like, there's a big part of our population that is not sensitive to that and doesn't care, even though it is wrecking our ability to do things that we need to
Yeah,
do,
because
and
because we
but
want it and we want it now, and this is what we want. We don't want a different alternative. And like you
yes,
said, I mean, you need
yeah,
that pressure to start thinking critically about things rather than just
yeah,
kind of saying that, you see it, you want it, and you don't want another alternative, right? It's I mean, I think that's a great
right.
quote because it's very, very true. And did you say that that was a $30 million project to connect to a VA? It's like you may as well just build a new one.
Um, Yeah, no, well, the sad thing is they had just in the last few years moved the VA from, somewhere else where it was actually decently located out to the edge of this industrial park where they could ostensibly get some cheap land to build
Yeah,
it. I
and
mean,
so how much did
this
that
is the
cost
stuff
on
where,
top of whatever project you're talking
right,
about?
again,
Yeah.
without with weirded out constraints, you ask the wrong question and you get stupid answers
Yeah,
like this.
imagine what that money could have gone towards. Yeah.
It, it's frustrating because our system overcomes uh, stupidity with money. I mean, really, when we use the term orderly but dumb to describe top down systems, we're talking about systems that have historically tried to overcome stupidity with just money. And when money is not a constraint, you can build the bridge. I mean, you can build the bridge in the wrong place, realize it 5 years later, and then build the bridge in another place because, like, what does it matter? Money is not a
Yeah,
constraint, and money and everything that it
we are
represents.
like the ultimate
But
trust fund baby society.
we are the ultimate trust fund baby. That's what we are. And you can. I'm with you on loathing, the boomer mindset, because this is the boomer mindset personified, right? And I'm a Gen Xer, so I get to loathe boomers. Right? I get that. There's something unfair about that. I understand, but it is the boomer mindset of just think big, make no little plans, go out and build, transform everything, just throw money at it. And money as a proxy for thinking is ultimately really
I'm
destructive.
not going to completely let the boomers off the hook because I think that this is definitely the boomer system, but I think millennials have adopted it and just don't realize it. I mean, I think that it's mirrored in many ways within my generation as well.
I think, millennials, if we look at the good and the bad, I think if we start with the negative, they've adopted the entitled part of that
Yeah.
mentality. But Xers have to a large degree too. So I'm throwing stones from a glass house.
Yeah.
Um, they've largely adopted the entitled part of that. My sense is that as they get into positions of leadership, and positions of decision making, they grasp the constraints way more than boomers ever
Yeah.
did, because they have to actually live with more constraints than the boomers
Yeah.
have. You can be a dumb boomer, put a tiny bit of your money in savings, and you're rich today. You can't do that as a millennial. You're starting off like, not just not on third base. You're starting off on the bench in the dugout, behind three people who are playing in front of you. I mean, the millennial thing comes with this air of entitlement that makes no sense to me, but it also comes with a
A lot
lot
of
of,
constraints.
a lot, ton of constraints that I think they are smart enough to figure out,
Yeah.
and they're going to be
Yeah,
forced to.
very true. Very
Yeah.
true. Very, very different kind of mindset, which is interesting. And yeah, I think most of us just don't look at our 401ks anymore because we can't just put $5 in a savings account and be rich when we retire. So, kind of a bummer.
No. Well, you see those, when you enter into the investing world, there's always this thing that they do where they say, if you put $10,000 into this thing in 19 whatever, it would be worth this
Yeah,
today. And if you're in 2022, if you invest $10,000 here at this percent return over this many years, it'll be this. And it's supposed to get you to invest. But the reality is that if you were a boomer and you put $10,000 aside in 1960, it's worth an insane amount of money. And if you did that in 2000 or 2010, you are not getting anywhere near the returns in the first decade or two that the boomers
yeah.
did. It's not even close. It's a completely different system and a completely different
Well,
era.
no, it
But
makes a lot of sense that there is a sense of not having constraint and setting up society around the idea of not having constraints. And I think that, moving forward, research like this in the article is really important because it's it's kind of showing us this process of recognizing our constraints and needing to kind of pull back and start to recognize these tensions that exist that are being largely ignored now because of just the way things that had been, again, industrial complexes, right? It's like these are systems that have been set
mhm.
up during times where we aren't forced to recognize constraints and we are spending money and making things big and doing big projects, and we're kind of in a different era now. We need to start thinking more incrementally. We need to start thinking about how to drive down costs and not doing everything, uh, you know, not thinking in terms of just giant boondoggle projects every time we're doing something.
Well, I feel like the to me, this is what I started with, and I feel like this is the really important takeaway for people listening to this. This is not some taxpayer rights, government waste kind of league putting this out. This is not some right wing, we hate government kind of thing. These are people who really like transit, who are saying our systems are wasting ridiculous amounts of money and we need to do better.
Yeah,
And I think if we can get to the point where we say having transit is really important and we can deliver it well, but we have to fix the systems. We have to become more sensitive to cost. We can actually find that this crazy, insane political conversation we have melts away and we can actually focus on solving problems within constraints and do some beautiful
yeah,
things.
and in the case that they're sharing, it could be double the transit for the same amount of money or more than double the transit. I mean,
10
it's
times the transit.
incredible.
Same
So
amount.
yeah, I think that's a good point. This
Yeah,
is a group that loves transit, and uh, this is a fascinating article. So I'm glad that we covered it this week.
it is.
So let's leave it there. But before we finish today, it is time for the down zone. We're actually doing a special down zone this week. So, Chuck, I am going to pass it to you.
This is Member Week at Strong Towns. This is the one of 2 weeks out of the year that we pause and reflect on not only the thousands of people that make up the Strong Towns movement in terms of membership, but really the hundreds of thousands, the millions of people who read and interact with Strong Towns on a yearly basis. I don't know if you know this, Abby, but the Upzone podcast is our fastest growing podcast in terms of listenership.
Awesome.
We have, oh yeah, no, downloads are going through the roof. It's fantastic. We don't talk about membership on this podcast very often, but we should and we will today. Um, Strong Towns is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit organization. 40% of our budget comes from people who give us $5 a month on average is what it is. 50 or $60 a year is our average donation, but we have people who give us $1 a year just to be members, just to support what we're doing. When we talk about membership at Strong Towns, it's not a patron kind of model. I know like people have Substacks and you subscribe to help them out and support them. We're not setting out the tin cup and saying, hey, if you like what we do, give us $5. We're saying that this movement is about changing the way we build cities. It's about changing the way we make public investments. It's about changing the conversation, just like we're talking about today. How do we bring broad coalitions of people together to, from the bottom up, reform these systems? And if you want to see that happen, if you want to see that reality take place, then go and support Strong Towns. Go to strongtowns.org, which is our website. Click on Become a Member. Sign up to give a donation in any amount, and just say to us and to the thousands of other people who have signed up to become members, I'm with you. I want to see this happen. I want to see this transformation take place. I'm here. I'm among you, and I want to make it happen. And if you do, we're going to invite you to an onboarding process. We're going to give you special insider stuff. We're going to keep you in the loop. You're going to be part of our movement to change the direction of this country. And it's a really exciting time because we've seen tremendous growth in not only our membership, but in the uptake of our ideas. And we are on the cusp of doing some really huge, amazing things. So now is the time. Strongtowns.org, click on Become a Member. Abby, I'm, always grateful to have you on our, leading this podcast, leading this conversation, and being part of our movement. And I'm just grateful, that you're here doing what you do. So thank you. And thank you to all of our members as well.
Thanks, Chuck. Having a lot of fun doing it. Well, let's end it.
We are having fun,
Yeah, we always
right?
have fun. I think we do.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm happy that people listen.
people are listening and we're getting a lot of feedback, and they will say that they really like you, Abby, not so much me, but they think you're
Yeah,
great.
that's my favorite
And
review we've ever gotten.
it is, we have gotten that review a
Yeah,
number
I
of
don't
times.
like Chuck.
If you really like, when you sign up to become a member, there's actually a place where you can leave a comment, and the comment goes into a Slack channel that we have. And we see these all the time where people will say, I'm joining Strong Towns. I love Upzoned. I love Abby. In parentheses, Chuck, not
Yeah,
so
not
much.
so
That's
much.
cool. You can do that. We will get that feedback when you sign up. I see all of those messages, and I only cry every now and
Oh, that's very, very
then.
sad. Well, for anyone who's
If
listening,
you
be
want, can I?
nice to Chuck.
No, you don't have to be nice to me. Can I give you an inside
Yeah, for
thing?
sure.
Um, 'Cause you are a part of our Slack. I don't know if you see the uh, the channel where our donations come in. Um,
I
so
don't think
we use
so.
a software. Okay, I can get you access. It's
Yeah,
really
add me
fun
to
because
it.
people leave comments. Right? Like they leave comments with their donation, and we see them, and it's a lot of them are very beautiful.
Oh,
Like here's my
yeah.
story. I found Strong Down. No, they're beautiful. They really are
Yeah, I'd love to
inspiring.
see that.
Um, but the program we use to handle donations, because we don't handle credit cards, that's handled by a third party. I don't want to have like people's credit card
Yeah.
information. So there's a third party website that processes all this and keeps that all on file, and they've got all the security and all that stuff. That organization is called Fundraise Up.
Okay.
It is a nonprofit raising platform. So it's just a plugin on our site. If you go to strongtowns.org, click on membership, you'll see Fundraise Up plugin. That's where you sign up. Anyway, Fundraise Up, our insider way of using that is to say FU. It's the
It's the
FU plugin.
yeah.
FU. So we have a channel that is called FU Comments. And it's always funny because whenever anyone new starts at Strong Towns, they get invited to like all of our staff Slack
Yeah.
channels. And one of them is FU Comments. And they assume that it's
It's
going
like
to be,
angry people.
you know, yeah. And it winds up to be these beautiful member testimonials and words of encouragement and all that for
It's
people when they
it's the
sign up to become
Minnesota
a member. So
Engineering Board, and that's where they contact you through.
no, so we have a Slack channel called FU Comments. And when you sign up to become a member, if you leave a comment, it will show up in our FU Comments board,
Add me to
and
that.
I'll
I'd
read it.
love to
No
read
problem.
it, and I also want access to your Audible account so that I can listen to books.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. If you do that, I'll send you a hoodie. How about that?
Ooh, I want one of those
I
hoodies.
know.
I've got my Not Just Bikes hoodie on today.
I love that.
You have your multi.
Yeah, we just got new
Mhm.
hoodies and little mugs, so I'm pretty excited about it.
All right, we've got our member drive hoodie episode.
Yes. Yeah. Here. Gotta do
Cool.
the hoods. All right. Thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Upzoned. Keep doing what you can to build a strong town. Thank you.